Amy's going to be presenting on cut flower gardening. She's got some experience with this from her time in Kentucky. She spent a little time growing commercial cut flowers before she joined us here in Colorado. And I hope everyone's as excited as we are to hear Amy on cut flower gardening. I'm going to hand it over. Take it away.
With that, let's talk a little bit about cultivating cut flowers. And so we're going to do this class in two different parts. First thing we're going to do is talk about the history of cut flowers and the industry of cut flowers, and then we'll move into how to grow them. I always like to point out some of our CSU Extension resources that are available to all of you. You can find all of our fact sheets on our Extension website. Those are going to be pretty detailed, give you some recommendations. If that's too much information for you and you just want the Cliff's Notes version of that, you can go to Plant Talk. Or you can also find some really great blogs and articles written by us extension agents on our CSU cohorts blog, which is also where you can sign up for future classes and watch recorded classes that have already happened. So as I go through the class today, I'm going to be showing you lots and lots of pictures. Some of these were taken by me through traveling across the world, looking at cut flowers and other horticultural industries. And so I'll try to point out what each of those flowers are and where they're taken as we go forward. So this particular picture you're seeing right now is at a calla lily farm. This is in Oregon, and they specialized only in calla lilies because it's just a great environment for those there. So what we're going to do in today's class, I'm going to give you those fun facts about the worldwide cut flower industry. We'll talk about how cut flowers are grown commercially across the world and in the United States. And then we'll go through how you can grow some cut flowers here in Colorado. We'll touch on the planting process, the growing of those, some cultivar selections and some harvesting. And then we'll end up with some just general tips for preserving and maybe a little bit on arranging. One thing to note is there's a lot of different types of cut flowers you can grow, as you'll learn from today's class. We don't have time to touch on all of the cultural requirements for each one of those because they're all so different. So I'm going to try to give you some general advice, and then we'll touch on some specifics as we go. So just a little fun fact, several fun facts anyway, about the cut flower industry worldwide. So in total, the flower industry revenue across the world, and this is from 2019, is about a $34.3 billion industry, which is a lot. There are over 15,000 retail florists across the United States alone. Colombia actually is now our top source in the United States for importing our cut flowers. Most of ours, 78%, come from Colombia. Christmas and Hanukkah actually turn out to be the top holidays for flower selling, and that's about $2.28 billion a year. A lot of that, I think, is because this is a holiday or a season that's celebrated around the world for various reasons. And so whereas Mother's Day might be more of a US holiday, or Valentine's Day might be more of a US holiday, you would think that those would be the most popular times for cut flowers, but really it's that Christmas, Hanukkah season. And ironically happens here in the United States when we don't grow cut flowers, except for in greenhouses. Here in the United States, Mother's Day is kind of the topper on the list. 69% of the gifts that are given on that day are cut flowers, and people spend about $1.9 billion just for that one holiday. So some fun facts for you. The picture that you see here is actually one I took in the Netherlands at the Aalsmeer Flower Exchange. It's like a stock exchange for flowers, and we're going to watch a little video in the next clip about that. So top 10 countries exporting cut flowers across the world. These are the ones that have the highest dollar value in 2018. The Netherlands, it's really pretty far up there on the top. It's holding that first spot pretty well. About 48.2% of exported flower bouquets come from the Netherlands. Colombia is right now, well, it's a little bit further behind, but it's number 2 at 1.5 billion. And then you start to see Ecuador, Kenya, Ethiopia, Belgium, all the way down the list there. Notice what's missing, and that's the United States. We used to grow a lot of cut flowers, but the world market has changed that. Here's a picture of why the Netherlands is the top of the list. if you ever get a chance to fly over the Netherlands in May, this is not my picture, although I did get to do this. It looks like a patchwork quilt, and it's absolutely gorgeous. Most of those are tulips, but there's also plenty of other cut flowers that are grown there as well. But this is during tulip harvest in May, flying over the Netherlands. So I love this historical fact about the cut flower industry. There's this thing called Tulip Mania. And if you haven't heard about this, this was actually the first economic bubble that happened in the world. During the Golden Age, back in the 1600s, right around the 1630s, there was this shift in how the world was being dominated. So the Netherlands, they were really moving forward with exploration, and they built the first stock, or they developed the first stock exchange, and they kind of started to develop this middle class system. But there was still this socioeconomic hierarchy. And so people with a lot of money didn't have a way to show their money because they didn't have the normal titles like you would in a monarchy, because they were, again, forming this new democracy. So the way that they wanted to show off their wealth, that upper class, was to purchase tulips and plant tulips around their yards, because basically these came through the shipping channels from Central Asia, and they found out that tulips grow really, really well in the Netherlands. They have sandy soil, they have kind of a humid climate, they're more of a northern climate, and so everything was working in their favor, and tulips just took off. And so, as I mentioned, the people with a lot of money would plant tulips everywhere to kind of show off their wealth, because they couldn't say they were a king or a queen or any other kind of title. So what they did was eventually they found this one tulip that had stripes on it, like the one that you see in the picture there. And because it was so unique, the price of that one particular tulip started to skyrocket. And it was actually the first, what do they call them? Futures, where you are essentially buying the rights to a tulip, but you don't actually get the bulb, because the bulb can't be harvested until much later in the year. So they see it, they love it, they buy into it, and then they sell that share. And so you can start to see where this starts to kind of create that first market like we have today. So anyway, the prices for those futures rose, and people started buying up more and more futures as more of an investment. They didn't even care about the tulip at this point. But then they found out that this particular tulip is not a variety at all. It's a virus that infects the tulip and causes this breaking in the color of the petals. And eventually it degrades the tulip bulb to the point where it dies off. And so it wasn't sustainable to keep producing these, and they couldn't produce these. So the bubble burst. That was our first economic bursting of a bubble. And you can see in that chart there that the price just dropped overnight. Before this happened, people were literally trading a tulip bulb for a house. And so it just goes to show that, like, sometimes these things aren't stable, right? So I just love that story. It's not the best story because it ended in some tragedy for a lot of people, but it's very interesting. Semper Augustus is that tulip that was grown back then, or viceroy, and it no longer exists today. And that disease, that virus, is transmitted by aphids, just FYI. So I mentioned, this compounded with the fact that the Netherlands kind of dominating the world at that time really brought about this Netherlands cut flower industry. And today it's the #1 industry for their country, and it's also the top country in the world. Also in the Netherlands, you will find the tulips celebrated as it's kind of their country's flower. They have a place called Keukenhof Gardens where they do a huge display of tulips every year, and other cut flowers as well. I want to say they plant something like 7 million bulbs every year. And you don't have to be a photographer. This place will make you a photographer. I took all of these pictures, and this was a long time ago with a camera, not a cell phone. And wow, it just makes it easy to be a photographer. So moving on to other countries, as we all know now, the Netherlands was the top of the list, but there really are a lot of other countries that have started to come into this industry. And so in South America, this is a great place for growing cut flowers. They have that ideal climate. They came on the scene mostly because they had fewer labor costs. They also had fewer regulations. High altitude doesn't hurt. Sunlight and flowers go hand in hand, and a lot of our cut flowers really prefer full sun. And so their high altitude helped a lot. They are also close to the equator, so they don't have a lot of that seasonality to deal with that we do here in the United States. Their weather is very predictable. And so you can see from 2005 in 10 years to 2015 that the other countries are starting to take away a little bit of that chunk from the Netherlands. And again, from both of these lists, well, from the first list, you can see US used to be on that list, but then by 2015, we don't even make the cut. So a lot of that had to do with the introduction of the South American market. Colombia is dominant in that market in South America. About 65% of the cut flowers that we export into the import into the United States come from Colombia. They also export to Russia and Europe. A lot of that is roses. They also produce carnations, mums, lots of other things, but really roses are top on their list. But it's not all rosy, again, because a lot of these South American countries came on the scene because they have lower wages for their workers. They also, without those regulations, they can have longer hours. A lot of the workforce is women that are also caring for children. And so it does create kind of a situation that's not all rosy. And again, it caused the decline in the US market. So, but you know, it is what it is. And there's other countries that have jumped onto this train as well. So Ecuador jumped into the scene in 1991 when we had this act go through called the Andean Trade Preference Act. And it was really all about promoting local industries that were legal. And the United States helped in this. In fact, I think some CSU faculty ended up going down to Ecuador to help them establish some of their cut flower farms. Almost 15,000 acres under production in Ecuador. They employ about 103,000 people, generating almost $1 billion a year. In fact, it probably is $1 billion. These stats are a couple years old. And 73% of their flowers grown are also roses. The reason that they're so great with this is because they can provide a superior product. They have larger heads, they have longer stems, they have more brighter and more brilliant colors, and they really produce what's considered that luxury flower. And so, so they have really come on the scene. Now, as I mentioned, that US market kind of declined as the South American market started to build, but we still have production of cut flowers on a large scale here in the United States. So these are some pictures I took in Mount Vernon, Washington. This is at a tulip bulb grower. So Washington State has a very similar climate to the Netherlands. They've got that coastal, I can't think of the word, but it's just kind of a mild climate, temperate, there's the word, that coastal temperate environment. They've got sandy soil, which tulips love, also similar to the Netherlands, being close to the coast. And they've got that mild, again, that mild kind of climate. So this is something you'll see in Washington. There are a lot of tulip bulb growers there. Also, kind of in that same area of the Pacific Northwest, there's a lot of hydrangea production. This is taken from Brookings, Oregon. Again, some pictures I took on a trip out there in probably 2007. And again, ideal climate for hydrangeas. Hydrangeas, the word hydra means water, and they like water, which is one reason why they are so difficult to growing hydrangeas here in Colorado, is because we're a semi-arid climate. They like that humidity. They love the cloud cover. They love that those rains. And so I actually was a research tech at the University of Kentucky, and we grew hydrangeas there. And now we didn't have the sandy soil that hydrangeas can like. And we had a little bit more sun, but we used shade tunnels to kind of create that cloud cover that they prefer. So that's from Oregon, hydrangeas in Oregon. Here's a couple more pictures. Even there, they use shade cloth to keep that intense sunlight from changing the color of those flowers. The color of those flowers, believe it or not, in the cut flower industry gets matched to this set of little tiles with different colors on them, and it will be indicated what exact color those are. So that was part of my job in Kentucky, was checking the color of all the hydrangeas and recording that. Fun stuff. You saw this picture or similar pictures at the beginning. This is calla lily production in Tillamook, Oregon. And so again, ideal climate for that particular crop. These are also a bulb crop, I think, and just a beautiful place to visit. And they provide a really superior product. Asian lily production is also popular in that same area. Again, this is just, as far as the United States goes, that Pacific Northwest is really the hotbed for cut flower production. There is rose production across the world. Most of that is not happening in the United States anymore. This is in Germany, where they actually breed roses for different attributes and different colors and smells and sizes. And all of this is done by hand. It's very intricate and takes a long, long time for them to get to the product that they want. Here's a few more pictures of that. I remember they had one that was almost black. It was such a deep red color. I can't remember the name of that one for the life of me, but this was a fun thing to see. And then, as we talked about earlier, poinsettia production is probably the reason that that Christmas and Hanukkah end up being the holiday where we see the most cut flowers sold. This is at a greenhouse in Morehead State University in Kentucky, where I was the manager, and we grew poinsettias every year from cuttings, and it was quite the process to produce these plants, and then they get sold for about $10 or more a piece. So you can imagine just how much money is involved in this, and it's fun. Dahlia production is another thing that's popular here in the United States. This is actually in Weld County. This is called arrowhead dahlias. There's a few other dahlia growers around the state too, but they're using high tunnels with hail covering to protect their crop. Because if you are in this northern Front Range area, or Denver, or anywhere really along the Front Range, hail is not something that you haven't seen before, and it's pretty common in certain years. So they wanted to protect their crop by growing them under these hail covers, which I think is just fascinating. You can purchase dahlias and tubers from them. They also produce Lysianthus. This is a popular filler plant when it comes to cut flowers. It's kind of the afterthought that goes into the bouquet, but man, is it beautiful. And these are growing very well, again, in their high tunnel system. And then here's just a picture. I thought I hid the slide, but a picture of the poinsettia production from earlier. I should have probably moved that slide over a bit. So I think I will stop for a second, see if there's any questions in the chat box. We'll talk a little bit about Colorado, and then we'll move into some other things. How are we doing on the chat?
I do. Oh, here's one just popped up asking about more info on those hail coverings.
Okay, great. Yeah, you can get hail covering from a lot of different places. Sometimes a shade cloth and a hail covering can be the same thing. If you just do some research when you're searching around and you're shopping, and you can find that kind of combo product that'll work for both. I'm not sure the exact shade level, but I know for vegetable crops, sometimes we say 30% shade is probably what you need. So I would probably go with something similar. But I ended up purchasing some online, and it was a shade cloth / hail cover. Worked for both. You can get those in black, you can get them in white. They'll provide different levels of shade. So lots of options there.
And Amy, I'm typing into the chat one example of hail netting that you can purchase. We're not promoting this company or this product, but I'm just giving it to you as an example.
Great, thanks Allison for doing that. Yeah, there are lots of products out there, different sizes, different costs. Keep in mind that some of these are huge because they're made for greenhouses, and you can also buy remnants where you're just getting a little piece. I think I purchased some that were 8 feet by 15 feet or something, small enough that I could fit them over a small bed. All right, well, let's go ahead and move on. Continuing on, let's talk a little bit more about Colorado's cut flower industry. Believe it or not, we actually used to be the #1 carnation grower in the world, and that was up until the late 1970s. The Colombian producers could get those plants a lot more inexpensively, and they could grow a better product. And again, we helped establish their markets down there through some trade agreements. And so really that plateau near Bogota is the ideal place now for growing carnations. And so lots happened here. And so Colorado did end up losing out on its carnation industry. As far as pricing goes, don't be surprised to pay a lot of money for flowers. They are expensive. There's a whole process, as you saw with that auction, of how they get from the field all the way into your florist's hands or into that bouquet that you've been given. And so really, it's pretty astronomical that the worker gets about 4 cents to cut each stem. That grower will get about 30% or 30 cents on each stem. The florist will then pay $2 for that stem, and then they'll put a design together, and then you'll end up paying about $5 per stem when it comes to roses. So it's not uncommon to see a dozen roses go for $60. In fact, a lot of times they're more expensive than that depending on the season. As far as other cut flowers go, you can expect to spend about $10 or more for certain things like calla lilies, some of those really rare hybrid tea roses, hydrangeas, especially because they're so large. If you want one of those hydrangeas as large as your head, you're going to pay out the nose for it. And then also some unique orchids, because orchids have a process when it comes to growing them. You'll pay about $5 to $10 per stem for things like dahlias, tulips, more common orchids, and peonies. Here's a fun fact about peonies that I don't have in this talk, but Alaska has now become a major grower of peonies because they found out that they can produce a flower during a season when no one else can, because it's Alaska and they're delayed, right? So they're producing peonies from July through September when everybody else is done in June. So that's really come on the scene. And then under $5 per stem, you'll find things like Asiatic lilies, Gerbera daisies, carnations, gladiolas, and others. And I'm sorry, there's another slide in just a little bit where we'll talk about other very inexpensive flowers that you can grow as cut flowers. So let's talk about how to design your cut flower garden. This can really go a lot of different ways. You can mix your cut flowers in with your existing garden beds and your existing plantings. Just choose things that make good cut flowers. Like, for example, purple cone flowers make really good cut flowers, especially if you get the kind that are really tall. I think they're called mammoth. Those have usually 3 to 4 foot stems on them, so you can get a really nice cut. And you can work those right into your normal landscape. Or you can create what's called a working garden or a utilitarian garden. And that's going to be the picture in the upper right corner there, where you have these nice rows and everything's organized by species and grouped in different ways. But it's very much a working garden, not necessarily a designed garden, although I think it's very beautiful. Also, you can do raised beds or repurpose old containers. The lower left or the lower right picture there is a shipping container that I repurposed into a cut flower garden bed, sort of. And so in there I grew zinnias and cosmos. And so, however you want to do this, you can work these things into your landscape in a lot of different ways. When you are planning and prepping that cut flower garden, no matter which design you choose, you want to make sure it's a sunny site. Again, very few cut flowers will grow in the shade. Most of them are going to be full sun lovers. And so choose a nice sunny site. Now that little bit of shade cloth here in Colorado, that might be one of those questions where you're going, you just mentioned shade cloth and hail cloth. That's okay. Our sunlight here in Colorado is super intense. We're a mile high. We don't have as much atmosphere to filter out some of that sunlight. As you all know, you get sunburned easier. So don't worry about that. Your plants are still going to get plenty of sun. But if you have issues with that, just learn from what you're planting in the next year. Maybe put them in a sunnier location if that shade cloth is too much shade for them. Cut flowers do need a well-drained soil. Most of these like a well-drained, but consistently moist soil. So that's kind of a hard one to get. But if you've got really heavy clay, you might want to do some amending, maybe with some expanded shale or some squeegee or some, which is like a crushed pea gravel, or some organic material like peat moss to help kind of break up some of that clay. That'll help with the drainage. And also, if you're going to be growing in containers, make sure your containers have good drainage as well. You can add some compost up to about 8 inches deep and improve that clay soil as well, or that sandy soil as well. Just make sure you're incorporating that in with that 8-inch deep layer. Don't just pile 8 inches of compost on top of your soil. It's not going to do you any good. You've got to incorporate that together. And then, you know, providing a wind buffer is important, especially here in Colorado. It gets windy. I'm up in Severance. It's windy all the time, it seems like. And so if you've got a fence that you can maybe use it to buffer that wind, or creating another, for example, in the picture here, you can see this row of raspberries or blackberries, one of the two, probably blackberries. Those are pretty tall. They've used that as kind of a wind buffer to buffer the rest of that garden, that cut flower garden, because you're going for the blooms and you want those blooms to be beautiful, not tattered. Couple other points when you're planning out that garden: you want to group species of plants together according to different needs. And so I like to do mine by water and height. Those are kind of the two factors that I use. You want to plant your tall types together away from where they might shade out the smaller ones. For example, if you've got a bed that's, say, 15 feet wide, you might want to take that middle 5 feet and plant your tallest ones in the middle or toward the back, depending on where that sunlight is, what direction it's moving. Just always keep in mind that you might be shading out something else. And like I said, clustering according to water needs is really a great way to do it. You see a couple pictures on the bottom there. That's straw flower on the left, and gomphrena or globe amaranth on the right. Both of those are pretty low water users, as well as the purple coneflower. But then there's other ones that like more water. So I like to put my low water users together. Just makes it so much easier. When you are installing and planting that garden, if you're going to be using this utilitarian or this, this kind of road garden layout, you want to make your rows no wider than 4 feet. And that's just so that you can actually get into the center of that bed and be harvesting without reaching too far over other plants, knocking other blooms and damaging them. It makes it so much easier. And it also provides more sunlight all the way around for those flowers. So this is a really great picture here. It shows those 4 foot wide beds and how you've got space to move around. And those flowers are looking pretty fantastic, if you ask me. If you have those taller plants, so on the left-hand side of that picture, that looks like a bachelor's button or a cornflower, that's going to probably need a little bit of staking or something. So you might want to put those in a more narrow bed to keep them from flopping over, and so you can really pin them up. You can use lots of different things as cut flowers. I know I've been talking a lot about annuals, but you can also use perennials as cut flowers. Get creative. You can use woody plants. For example, this is the hot wings Tatarian maple that we talk about a lot in our low water classes. This has beautiful seed pods that are bright red, and they would make a great addition to a bouquet. And so you can use those. Kenzie's Ghost is on the upper right. That's a hardy perennial woody vine, and it has that eucalyptus look. And so that's a nice one to add in. Just keep in mind that if you're cutting those, you're pruning that plant. So you're going to be affecting the shape of your plant. So if it's a landscape plant, just know that. Bottom left is Forsythia, beautiful in the spring. And this is also, how do I say this? Woody plants in the spring before they bud out. You can clip those when you're pruning, bring them inside, put them in a warm vase, and they'll bloom indoors, usually before they will outside. And then also don't forget about your vines, your grasses, other greens. Lots of stuff can be used here. This year I'll be growing basil as a filler plant for several bouquets I'm going to do. A couple more things about planting that cut flower garden. You can also group things by bloom period, or don't forget to choose different bloom periods, especially with your perennials. They tend to have a short blooming window. And so you want some early blooming perennials, some mid-season perennials, and then some late blooming perennials. Same thing with annuals though. Some will bloom a lot more than others. Just always trying to get the maximum you can out of that cut flower garden. Succession is a way that we plant annuals in groups. So one thing you could do this with would be like sunflowers. It's a good example. Or zinnias is another good example, where you plant some early, maybe wait a couple weeks or even a month, plant some more, wait a couple more weeks, plant some more. And that's going to give you peak harvest throughout the season. And so you'll do that with some annuals. When you're picking out your plants for the garden, you know, this is the fun stuff. You can go kind of crazy on this. And oftentimes as gardeners, we end up buying a lot more plants than we have room for. And that's okay. Give those to your friends, share them with your neighbors. It'll be good. But what you want to really think about is planting a variety of textures. And don't forget about the greenery, because oftentimes we think so much about the flowers and the colors that we need that greenery to act as a neutral. Color is a personal choice. You might like the reds and the yellows and the oranges, or you might be someone who likes the purples and the pinks, or you might just want a variety of all those colors. It's really your personal preference when it comes to color. Oh, just a side note, that picture there on the right is called Bells of Ireland, and I'll be showing that later as one of those really great options for greenery. A couple more tips here when you're choosing those plants. Like I mentioned earlier, pick things with stems that are long, 18 inches or more. And some things you'll find will even grow up to 5 feet tall, or 4 to 5 feet is not uncommon. Also think about vase life. Some things make nice cut flowers, but they only last a day or two in a vase. Poppies are one of those things that they're beautiful, but they just don't have the vase life. So you don't usually see those making their way into too many arrangements. Or if they do and they fade out, you just want to pull them out, or maybe the petals will fall off and you'll just have that seed pod behind in the bouquet, but that's okay. Also, everlasting flowers are great to add into your cut flower garden. These are good for drying, and they're also great for cut flowers. And I've got several examples to show you shortly. A couple more notes, and then we'll take a break here in a second for some questions. As I mentioned, you're growing things with long stems. And so staking some of these cut flowers is going to be essential. Or you'll end up getting lodged plants or plants that don't have straight stems. And it's just, if you're going for that quality premium product, really you want to be staking. And you can do this with what's called a wide spaced mesh and stakes. And that's going to keep those flowers from growing in different directions. So you would want to put this on at planting. And then as the flowers start to grow up, you may need to go in and do a little bit of moving around and tucking stems into certain little spots to get them to grow up right. This is Snapdragon that you're seeing in the picture here. It definitely is one that benefits from staking. Dahlias generally are going to need staking. They get very tall, very susceptible to damage from wind. Lysianthus that I showed earlier in that high tunnel, that's one that requires this mesh netting. There's just so many that can really benefit from this. So whether you're using the mesh netting or you're just using standard stakes and tying up to stakes, either one works. But I find that this netting is really great for those beds because it's already cut to size and easy to install. Irrigating, you want to make sure you're avoiding drought stress. This can slow down flower production, and sometimes your flowers can abort from this, and that's not what we're going for. We really want the flowers. And so if you're in a situation where you don't have a lot of irrigation, or maybe you just want to be more sustainable and you want to grow some of those lower water types, that's what you want to be choosing. If you are unsure if you can be out there watering consistently, then yeah, I would choose those drought tolerant types. Another thing to avoid is overhead irrigation. While it might be easier to overhead irrigate, it really can cause some foliar diseases on some plants, in particular roses. They get powdery mildew, and there's some others that get similar diseases as well. I personally like to hand water my little garden. It's not very big, and I just like to hand water. So I do that at the base of the plants. I'm not too worried about the very bottom leaves, but I don't want to be spraying overhead. And then if you're concerned about that and you really want to even conserve more water, you can use drip irrigation in your beds. And that's going to really put that water right at the root system where the plant needs it. When you're fertilizing your flower garden, really, as I mentioned early on, there's lots of different types of flowers and they all have different needs. So it's hard to say, give one blanket recommendation for everything. But generally, you can mix a granular or a slow-acting fertilizer into that bed at the beginning of the season. And then you can also periodically dose your plants with a very dilute rate of liquid fertilizer. Now, in some places, they will spray that directly on the plant foliage as a kind of a booster. Sometimes it'll help with the absorption of those nutrients really quickly. But be careful doing this, because if you're doing this in the heat of the day or in the sunlight, it can burn the plants. So if you're a novice or you're just trying it out, go ahead and do the granular or the slow release and mix that into the bed at the beginning, or do your doses of dilute fertilizer into the ground itself. Again, doing this in the morning is really ideal so that the foliage dries out before the end of the day. And again, it's different. Lots of different plants have lots of different needs when it comes to fertilizers. There's heavy feeders, and then there's light feeders, and you really have to look at each individual plant to know what they're going to prefer. So fertilizing is a tough one to give specific recommendations on. All right, let's stop for a second before we jump into harvesting and cutting back. Do we have any more questions?
I do not on my end. Allison, do you?
I do have one from Elizabeth that just came in. Amy, do you have any tricks of keeping hibiscus well watered and healthy? I feel like it's a water loving plant.
Yeah, hibiscus is a tough one too, because they've got those blooms that are so big, and it's not one that I've grown myself, so I don't know that I have any tips other than maybe you could add a little bit of mulch around the plant, not against the stem of the plant, but a couple inches away from the main stem, and then just kind of put maybe an inch or two of mulch around, and that'll help conserve the water that you do put on the ground and keep it from drying out. I bet wind protection would also help in that situation, because those petals on a hibiscus are very thin and very big. And so I could imagine that they lose a lot of water through those petals as well. So I would say maybe try some mulch, water at the base. It's a tough one. All right, I'll go ahead and move on. I've got several more slides to get to in the next 15 minutes. So let's talk quickly about maintaining that cut flower garden. And I just mentioned this to Elizabeth's question. You can spread out some mulch to help reduce that watering and that need for weeding. But do keep up on keeping the garden weed free, because those weeds really compete with the flowers for that water and those nutrients. You want to initiate and maintain that flower production by picking your blossoms regularly. A lot of flowers, the more you pick, the more they bloom. So if you leave that bloom on there, the plant is putting a lot of energy into that bloom, and it's not producing other blooms. So by cutting that bloom, you're going to encourage more blooms. With perennials, same thing goes. Keep them deadheaded. They're going to bloom for longer periods of time. And then the plant's not trying to produce seeds off of those dead flowers. That takes a lot of energy. So if you can keep those flower heads removed, again, it will put more energy into producing more buds and more blooms. Oftentimes you'll get that one bloom, that very first bloom, and it's a really big bloom, and you don't want to cut it. But I'm going to tell you to cut it, except for sunflower. There's some that are different. Sunflowers, you get one bloom per stem with some varieties, but for like a dahlia, cut that first bloom, put it in a dish, enjoy it, because that's going to give you more blooms back. So let's go through lots of different cut flowers that you can grow in your garden. I just want to show you the options. You've got these standout flowers that are big and bold, and all of the ones that I'm going to cover in these next few slides are things that you can grow here in Colorado. So things like dahlias. If you want to know more about dahlias, Allison taught a summer blooming bulb class last week, I think it was, or maybe it was the week before last. And she also talked about gladiolas, which is another option. That's in the upper right-hand corner there. The dahlias are in the lower left. Things like celosia are fun. They kind of look like, they're very soft, like velvet. It's also called chenille plants sometimes. Those are great. And then peonies. We can grow peonies here in Colorado too, not just in Alaska. In Colorado, you can do this as well. Those are a great option to sub out for roses in a bouquet. They're super easy cut flowers to grow. Zinnias are probably, in my opinion, one of the easiest ones. There's some that are called cut and come again. That just tells you right there, keep cutting them and you'll get more blooms. And they're, really nice architecture to them. And that's what's in the lower right-hand picture. Cosmos is another really easy one to grow. The purple and pink flowers that you see there in the lower left. They sometimes don't have quite as long of a base life as like the zinnias or the sunflowers, but they can hang on if they're healthy. Sunflowers, like I just mentioned, that's in the upper left. That's a teddy bear sunflower. That's a fun one. Easy to grow, best for direct sowing. So if you're one that likes to start your stuff indoors, I would hold off on your sunflowers, put those directly into the ground. And annual rudbeckia, I love annual rudbeckia. There are so many options. And they look like black-eyed Susans. They're related to black-eyed Susans, but they're annuals. They're not perennials. So they're going to produce a lot more blooms, and they're going to be producing all summer long. I mentioned zinnias, lots of great varieties out there of zinnias that you can try. There's the Benary's Giant, the State Fair Mix, Oklahoma Mix, which has smaller flowers. But again, so many different types. I'm growing one this year called Zindrella Orange, and it's like the brightest orange you can think of. At least that's what it looked like in the magazine. We'll see if it looks like that in my garden. Snapdragons are another really easy one to grow. So you can get just your normal everyday snapdragons, or you can get the really tall ones. So the rocket and the Madam Butterfly are much taller. That's the picture there on the far right. There's another one called Apple Blossom that I came across as I was doing some research that I thought was just really pretty with that really nice soft pink salmon color to it. I mentioned sunflowers earlier, lots of different types here. They can get really tall, and some of those sunflowers can get really big heads on them, much too big for a vase. And so you'll want to stay away from the sunflowers that are used more for eating and things like that. Those are more production flowers, and stick with those cut flower varieties like the Pro Cut series, the Sunrich series. There's one called Moulin Rouge. That's the really dark red one that you see in the picture there. Or Firecracker is the upper left-hand picture. And I showed you the teddy bear earlier. I think teddy bear might be a little bit different in that I believe it has several stems of flowers, not just the one single stem with the one single bloom. But again, look at your seed packets or research from the company that you're buying your plants from to find out more. I just want to briefly touch on the hybrid tea roses. You can grow these here in Colorado. They take a lot of special care and really a whole other hour of a class to teach you how to grow roses. We have some amazing master gardeners that are rose growers or former rose growers or breeders that know way more about this than I do. But I wanted to show you a couple varieties that are very popular. Always and Forever has that really nice, deep, beautiful, consistent red color. And then Peace is the lower picture there. That's a nice golden yellow with the pink edges. You could literally spend all day talking about roses, and there's just so many different kinds. But typically it's these hybrid tea roses that are grown for cut flowers. There are shrub roses that are, you can use them as cut flowers, but they're not necessarily meant to be cut on a lot, and they don't have as pretty blooms. Then we've got these filler type plants, kind of I hate to call them the afterthought because some of these are gorgeous. This purpley colored one that looks kind of fuzzy, that one's called Ageratum. I love that one. Snapdragons, we've already kind of covered those. I hope you can see my pointer here as I'm pointing to these different flowers. Here's a snapdragon. Eucalyptus, you can toss those in as a filler. Status is one I love. This one has a nice long stem, little tiny blooms. They're kind of papery, and they will literally hold their color for years and years and years as dried flowers. I have some that are 20 years old and they're still purple. Gomphrena or globe amaranth is what you see here, these little purple balls in this third bouquet. Cosmos, again, in that third bouquet, that's the more petally flower. Bells of Ireland are in this last bouquet that you can see here. And then there's like celosia and coleus and basil and lots and lots and lots and lots of other options. Here are some of the foliage plants that you probably more commonly see in bouquets. These are sold more from florists. A lot of these you can't grow in Colorado. You have to purchase them in from other places. But Dusty Miller, you could grow that here. Salal is one we see a whole lot. And that one is this one down here at the bottom. That one's grown here in the United States in the Pacific Northwest. So lots of options for foliage. You could have a fully green bouquet with no color, all foliage plants, and it would still be a knockout. Here's some more of those foliage plants. You can use coleus. That's one of those that you can pop into your garden or even into some containers around your house and use it as a filler. There's the bells of Ireland again that we talked about earlier. Those are tall. I'm going to be growing some of those this year, and I'll be staking them with that mesh staking. Let's see, some other ones, hostas, you can use those, asparagus fern, or even asparagus, like the ferny leaves of asparagus can be tossed into a bouquet. Also, don't forget about the smell. So over the years, we've been breeding flowers and we've been breeding them for things like longer storage life or better color or an interesting form. And over time, some of our flowers have lost their scents. And so keep that in mind. You want to be adding that back into your bouquet if that's something you're going for. So the old garden roses are going to have the smells. Some of the newer garden roses, not so much. But sweet peas, those smell really fantastic. So that's the upper right-hand picture here. Stock in the middle picture here, beautiful flowers, smells very, very nice. Lilac, you could add those into your bouquet. We all know those smell good. Lavender, freesia, lots of options here, but don't forget the scent. And then as I mentioned earlier, there's those flowers that are going to last as dried flowers. And these are great to add in. And typically, these dried flowers also tend to be some of our lower water using flowers. The exception would be hydrangea. It's just weird that it loves the water, but then it also dries well. But you could do things like yarrow or status, or again, that globe amaranth. I'm just in love with this plant, the globe amaranth. Lavender, celosia, hydrangea, and straw flower. So there's a really great dried flower with lots of different colors, and I'll be growing some of those this year as well. Here's the globe thistle over here, and status is the pink one that you see in this bouquet on the right. So just because we only have 5 minutes, I'm just going to go ahead and plow through these last 5 or 6 slides, and then we'll take some questions at the end. You do need some tools when you're ready to start harvesting your cut flowers. You'll want to have a bucket of water right there with you as you cut. As soon as you cut that stem, you've taken away its ability to pull up any water from its roots, and it can wilt, it can flop over, it can dry up really fast. So have that bucket ready. You only need to fill it just with a couple inches of water, because you just need the base of that stem to get into the water, and you don't want to gum up the rest of it. It can cause some ickiness in the leaves and stuff if they get too wet. So, so just fill it up a couple inches and make sure you hit the bottom of that bucket with the stem. Not hard, but just make sure it's all the way down. You'll need a sharp knife. And when I say a sharp knife, be careful. You need a really sharp knife. Some people even purchase a florist knife for this. Or you can use floral shears, which have pointy ends, pointy blades that can really get into those tiny little spaces to cut just that one little stem. Some people prefer to have a flower preservative on hand as well. You'll want to have that vase to put your flowers into, and then you just need an artistic eye or really just an inspiration. The flowers are going to be so pretty that even if you aren't an artist or a, versed at creating bouquets, you can do it. Just be inspired. For roses and things like that, you can get these fun tools that will help you strip those thorns off, or you can use that really sharp knife I was talking about, and then just quickly moving away from your body, run that knife down the side of that stem and strip off the thorns that way. You can also use your hands to strip off leaves. You just kind of grab the stem and pull down, but put a glove on, put a nice heavy pair of gloves on when you do that, because even stripping leaves can cause some hurt, cause your hands to get a little torn up. But don't forget to remove those thorns if you are growing those roses. When you're cutting your flowers, again, you want to be putting those stems into that water. If you have preservative in it, that's fine. You want to do that immediately upon cutting. So you cut and you put it in the bucket, and you cut and you put it in the bucket. Don't walk down the row and cut 20 or 30 blooms and then try to put them in the bucket, because inevitably by the time you get to that 30th bloom, that first bloom is stressed. And then know that some of your cut flowers, depending on what they are, can last up to 2 weeks if you treat them properly, if you recut those stems periodically to open up those capillaries again and let that water get to flowing into them. So just briefly on flower preservative, you can get this at all of your local floral shops. A lot of nurseries also carry the stuff. This is just one brand. There's other brands out there. Or you can do this at home. This is a home recipe, so I'm going to put a big disclaimer on this. I think this actually is also in a research publication, which is why I'm showing it to you today, because we try to stick to that research-based information. But you can use 1 part of lemon lime soda that is not diet, because you want the sugar. So Sprite, Sierra Mist, things like that. Mix it with 3 parts of water and add just a 1/4 teaspoon of bleach. That could be one recipe. And I will say also to test this out, just like you would anything else, instead of going full force. Or you can do a couple tablespoons of lemon juice, a tablespoon of sugar, and a 1/4 teaspoon of bleach in a quart of warm water. That could also be helpful. Be careful with that bleach. You might want to leave that out on some of them. I'm not sure if it will affect certain flowers in certain ways. I personally just go get the stuff from the florist. Aspirin and vinegar, although have been a popular thing to try, they have not been found out to be effective with any kind of research. If you really want to delve into more information, University of Illinois actually has a great extension publication all about cut flowers, and it goes into a lot more detail for different specific flowers as well. Keep in mind, Illinois' climate is different from Colorado's, and so that will make a difference when you're reading through it. And then when you're arranging your flower arrangements, here's just a few tips for you. Generally speaking, your design should be about 1.5 to 2 times the height of the container. There's exceptions to every rule, and you can see that in some of these pictures. Always think about how it's viewed. Do you want just a 180 view of just one side of the vase, or do you want it to be a 360 view? Also think about where it's going to be placed. I like to think in layers, so cut your flowers at various lengths, and that's going to help give you kind of a different shape and lots of different layers. Remove all of that foliage in the flowers that are underneath that water level, because it can get gummy, it can get kind of slimy, and those petal or those leaves will start to disintegrate, and it's just kind of gross. So remove all that foliage and flowers that's under the water line. Use that filler. Think of it as a neutral. Instead of thinking as whites and grays, as neutrals and blacks, think of green as your new neutral color. Have a focal point if you want to. So down here at the bottom, you see these little birds sitting in here. You can do that. You can add in fun little stuff, little ornaments or trinkets that can help. Create movement and interest with those add-ons. And above all, use your gut instinct. Forget about the rules. If you like it, that's all that matters. And don't worry about it. Have fun with it. It's flowers. These are fun things. Here's just one more quick slide to show you a fun activity that you can do with your kids or with your friends. Carnations are really easy to dye, and so and roses too. You can get these different little vases out, put some food coloring in them, stick a white flower in there, and watch them take on that color. Just kind of a fun thing to do.